Sosa. Now we open discussion to the floor, and I propose this. If you are asking a new question, just raise your hand. If you want to enter into a question that is going on, sign out like this. Okay? Good. So, go.
Thanks. Ernie, just a question about how you're thinking about the normative import of intellectual seeming, no case in which they do have normative import. Thinking about one of the paradigms you use of weighing considerations, pro and con. One view would be the intellectual seeming doesn't really do any work in those cases, that what justifies me concluding something? Well, just those considerations that speak in its favor. So it might be I rely upon the intellectual seeming making that judgment, but it doesn't add anything normatively to the case for whatever I end up concluding. I worry that if you do give normative weight to the seeming itself, it begins to look like a certain kind of double counting or something like this, right? Because what are the considerations that favor concluding P? Well, there's all these facts about the world that come as evidence. Then there's this other fact that given all those, it also intellectually seems to me as though P isn't that a recipe for being kind of overconfident, that being kind of counting your seeming? It almost seems like you want to do it at some point as an additional piece of evidence in addition to all these first order considerations, so to speak.
Yeah. Let's see. Of course, intellectual seeming can have lots of different kinds of objects. I mean, in the most general sense, it can have any kind of propositional object. The ones that count as intuitive have to have a special kind of object, but even they can have a great variety of objects. Among the objects of intellectual seeming can be that something properly seems on a certain basis to be so. So there can be a seeming directed upon a seeming and the propriety of a seeming. But I do want to distinguish, to emphasize the distinction between partial seeming and all things considered seeming, and then, of course, sense in themselves. Partial seemings are really relative matters. They are being attracted to assent to P by R, or by F, factor F. So there's now the conscious fact of being attracted. And now we can assess how proper, epistemically proper it is for you to be attracted to the extent that you are, to assent to that proposition by that factor. The attraction that derives from a particular factor has to be put together with the attraction or repulsion that may derive from other factors that are in play. And that's what pondering presumably involves, is being sensitive to the full variety of factors that you should be sensitive to in deciding on the question. And as a result of that pondering, then there's going to be a resultant attraction. That resultant attraction may be positive or negative. It is going to presumably disagree with either some of the repulsions or some of the attractions. But it itself isn't necessarily the belief. That is, once you decide, well, yeah, all things considered, it looks, but maybe it doesn't look powerfully enough that you should actually assent. That's the way I'm thinking, and I think this avoids the double counting.
On this same point, Paul Bogosian.
Really, just following up, just trying to get clear on the notion of an intellectual seeming. So I got a little bit confused actually in the answer that you gave. Let's just take a kind of typical philosophical scenario to get your counter-example. They describe a situation. And then the idea is you're supposed to say, well, does the person know or does he not know in that situation? And people say, right, he doesn't know in that situation. What's that based on? Well, an intuition. So there's just a seeming. It's not a seeming on the basis of some factor. That is, you've got the description of the scenario. There's a question of what to say. There's a question of what is justified in saying, and the justification seems to be the intellectual seeming that if the facts are as described, the person doesn't know. Right? Now, the thing that if I understand you right, you've got such a deflationary view of what it is for there to be such a seeming, that it seems to me to both make it hard to see what this notion is adding, especially to the normative story, and also how anybody could have gotten exercise about whether there is or there isn't such a faculty. I may be missing something, so let me just describe it like this. Look, we all know that we are attracted, we are disposed to go one way or the other. That's just a data, sociological data. And you can think of a skeptic who says, look, I know you're disposed to conclude one thing rather than another thing. But do you have any reason for going one way rather than another? We may all, in fact, converge in our dispositions as a result of training or biology or whatnot. But the normative issue is engaged only when somebody can provide you with a reason for being disposed to go one way rather than the other on a given question. And the invocation of intuition is supposed to be an answer to that. It's supposed to identify something identifiable independently of the disposition, which then somehow lends support to the disposition to conclude one thing rather than another. So and of course, perception, for instance, is like that. That raises a whole set of issues of its own, but at least it's that third thing. So am I getting you right that you actually think the intellectual seeming just is the disposition to conclude one thing rather than another? And if so, how could that actually be an answer to the normative question?
No, it isn't just a disposition to believe because, well, for one thing, there can be seemings that are opposed to each other. There can be a seeming that the lines are incongruent based on the look of the lines. So the look of the lines attracts you to say they're incongruent, but then measurement plus memory attracts you more powerfully to say they're congruent. So they're in conflict, and the measurement plus reasoning and memory wins out in this case. So so I don't want to think of them as just dispositions. They're their own thing. I mean, I don't know. I'd have much by way of a reformulation. So all I can do is point to something that I take to be a familiar thing to us all, that is the pondering of questions, the deliberating on choices, and what happens when that goes on. That is, we give weight, pro or con, and then ultimately come out with a resultant weight or a resultant attraction, and then ultimately people have belief on that basis. But I don't think that this would relate to issues of skepticism properly via an assumption that it's only if you can give reasons in favor of your empirical beliefs, let's say, in the face of a skeptical challenge, that you have properly met that challenge. Because I don't think that when we believe properly, with epistemically proper status, we must do so only on the basis of reason. So I think the skeptical challenge can be met without that assumption, which I take to be false. So one way to meet the skeptical challenge is a way that goes along with foundationalism, at least to this extent, that there are certain cases when we do properly believe with proper epistemic status in the absence of further reason. And I'm placing intuition in that category. Yeah.
I didn't mean to invoke the traditional skeptic at all. The idea was simply this: to take a domain where you think, you're not going to be able to explain how we have justified belief in that domain unless you invoke something like the faculty of intuition. It doesn't seem to me to really engage what it is that worries people, say in mathematics or in logic, to say, we have intuitions about what is true in the sense in which they're just dispositions to draw certain conclusions. Now, you said, no, that's not the view, because, and then the argument you gave didn't seem to me to ward off that interpretation, because, of course, you can have conflicting dispositions.
Okay.
And so it's not, you haven't settled the, so of course I might be drawn to this, and I might be drawn to that, and then all things considered judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me to, what people really want when they think that there is some justified way of going one way rather than the other, is something akin to ordinary sensory perception that does, putting the skeptic to one side, that does give you reason for believing P as opposed to something else. And in the absence of that, I don't see what epistemological work is getting done. That's where I have it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That's what a lot of people want. And a lot of epistemologists, including a lot of recent epistemologists, such as Larry Bondua, who's very emphatic on this. But it may be that we can't have what we want. That is, if you look at, say, introspection and you consider the model of introspective knowledge, which is just the taking of the given. Okay, now that doesn't work for paradoxes. So in the case of a paradox, so in the case of the pain, the introspective knowledge of the pain, it's the pain itself that explains. So in a way, it's your reason for believing you're in pain. It's just the pain. In the case of true, very simple, abstract truth, one might analogously say, well, it's just the fact that 1 + 1 = 2, and I understand it well enough, so that's what accounts for my knowing that 1 + 1 = 2. The fact is apparent, so it's a kind of a priori given that I just take. But if we agree that there are cases of false, foundationally justified belief, then it doesn't look like there's anything like that. There's no truth in the case of a paradoxical proposition that is false, that nevertheless you're powerfully attracted to. So, the proposal there is, well, if we think of what's involved in foundational knowledge generally, whether it's perceptual, introspective, or intuitive, there are, in certain cases, particular facts, and in certain cases it's even the particular fact believed that itself plays a role in your justification for believing in that fact, as in the case of the pain. But that doesn't work across the board. You're not always going to find a fact that you can appeal to as your reason for believing as you do, whether it be the fact that 1 + 1 = 2 or the fact that you're in a certain kind of pain. So it doesn't work across the board. We're not always going to be able to have reasons of that sort for our beliefs. If we insist, nevertheless, there can be foundationally justified belief, even when there isn't a reason of that sort, then our challenge, our task is, well, what kind of justification could it be that's there in the absence of anything you could point to as your specific reason for believing as you do in that particular case? And I guess I don't see which way to go. Of course, I would be attracted to a virtue sort of idea, but I don't see which way to go except something like a competence or virtue sort of idea. Now, of course, this does become an empirical issue. Because in doing epistemology, it may be that what we can hope to accomplish in the first instance anyway is to delineate what epistemic normativity is about, delineate what knowledge involves, and then see how well that fits with the manifest image, that is, with our use of epistemically normative concepts, with the way we evaluate each other, our belief formation, and so on. So all I need for my account to be defensible in the first instance is not cognitive science or psychology. All I need for it to be defensible in the first instance is that in the manifest image we believe that there are these competencies. Of course, the manifest image may be wrong. I mean, eventually maybe there's no single competence that accounts for how we believe across the intuitive board, logic, mathematics, arithmetic, and so on. Maybe it's discovered, and so we didn't really know what we thought we knew. Of course, empirical psychology science may discover there are no beliefs even. I mean, if the churchmen are right. So maybe we don't have knowledge anyway because of that reason. But so the project here is not so much pointing to reasons that can satisfy a skeptic about intuition or a skeptic more generally, but rather delineate an account of epistemic normativity that makes room for false epistemically justified belief.
On this same point, Paul Collins.
Yes, I'd just like to press Paul Gosman's question a little further. So to continue with the example of the word know or concept of knowledge, the knowledge we have about that concept of knowledge doesn't apply. It's not implausible that as children we are exposed to this term and we're trained in how to use it, and the end result of that is that a certain rule is instilled in us. Maybe we're not aware of it, unconscious, but that's the rule is, a certain definition, to accept it. Maybe the rule is accept S knows that P, if and only if, and then some logic condition. And what we philosophers do in trying to articulate the definition of knowledge is really doing, making it explicit. But anyway, if our understanding, our grasp of the concept consists in our having heard that rule, then what's going on when a person is in a situation and there they see, I forget the example of Jones, who comes to the belief that Mary's child is American and comes with reason, prove, justify them, and one makes the judgment, he doesn't know. Now this isn't some hypothetical, this is actually happening. He doesn't know, I just do something to you know what? Presumably my unconscious rule or my definition is being invoked and causing me to make the judgment I do. It's hard to see any role for intuition, either in the sense that Paul mentioned, or even in a scaled down meditation. Everything is sort of being explained in this term. Training, testimony, a rule in the head that causing certain I'm curious to see what you think in your situation isn't. I don't see it. Similarly, if it's not a real case of coming across this person making a judgment about whether you know. Suppose we're asked to imagine the scenario. We're told, consider a possible scenario in which the person reaches their belief in something. Would they know or not? Then, arguably, we're going into some kind of simulation. We're pretending to have the relation. Considering that scenario. And then, ultimately, the rule kicks in and tells us what the with respect to knowledge again, intuition, either a strong sense or a weak perception is coming in. And that's the example. I don't really see why the other examples of philosophical thought experiments are the same sort.
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent I can ultimately agree and say that's the way intuition works, at least linguistic intuition. It's because we're manifesting deeply embedded rules. that deep-seated rules that we acquired as children in learning the language. So linguistic intuitions, to a large extent, seem properly viewed this way. Of course, here I'm not talking about linguistic intuitions, and I would resist the reduction of thought intuitions and propositional intuitions to linguistic intuitions of a particular language. So I think they're just different phenomena, and so it would be a whole separate symposium or conference probably to go into the issue of the relation between thought and language, and whether one must think of thought as linguistically constituted.
Yes. Osvaldo Chateaubriand.
Thank you. There has been a fair amount of talk about intuition with respect to mathematical propositions, and the person who has most defended most strongly the notion of mathematical intuition was Gödel. And there has been a fair amount of discussion about Gödel's notion of mathematical intuition and exactly how to interpret it. But one idea that you can have is that, and Gödel himself compares intuition with perception. Now we know that in perception, or at least many psychologists, schools of thought suggest that perception is not just perception of sensations, but it involves abstract structuring. So in perception there are abstract elements and not only concrete elements. Now mathematical intuition might be an experience of abstract structurings, right? Especially if you think of mathematical structures as being structures of some sort and not being individual things. Now, when you get to, for example, something like number theory, in your paper you mentioned several times Ramanujan, who was a guy who had very specific and very strong intuition. And in fact, he didn't have a clear conception of proof. His results, both Hardy and Littlewood say about him that his results were all obtained by a mixture of intuition, analogy, induction, and so on, and then he would come out with these things.
Do you know what he actually thought was the source? A goddess was speaking to him.
Yeah, but it could be, but it could also be, let's see, for example, if you think of the natural numbers as ordered by successor, we basically have a certain picture of that, and we could talk about having a certain intuition of that. Obviously, we don't see the whole infinite thing, but we have a certain intuition of grasp of successor, let's say. Now, if you think about addition, on the other hand, addition also structures the natural number. It's much, much harder for any of us to picture the structure of addition. If you add to that multiplication and exponentiation, and you try to picture what the whole structure looks like, even partially, and the relations between various aspects of it, it's very difficult for us. But it might be that for somebody like Ramanujan, it isn't. I mean, there are these classical examples of Hardy that, gave him a certain number, and Ramanujan said, yes, this is the smallest number that can be decomposed as the sum of two cubes in two different ways. And, I mean, it takes a lot of, to see something like that. And it's not just the seeming, right? It must be some kind of grasp of these more complex relations that perhaps for many of us, they are not so obvious. Now, Gödel himself, when he talks about intuition, he says that intuition is also something that should be educated and should be developed. I mean, it's not something just primitive that comes to you. So that's just one remark. I mean, I don't know. And then I want to make another remark, which might have some connection with that, but it's not so clear to me what the connection is. There are some experiments, I don't know if you know about them, that were made both with small children and with dogs. First they were made with babies, and then they were made with dogs, about elementary mathematical perceptions. Now, for example, if one of you were to get up and leave, there are 5 of you there, and then 2 were left, that would be surprising. Right. Well, the experiments they did were essentially of that kind. They produced situations where, the result was not surprising, and situations where the result was surprising. And both babies and dog took a much longer time when the situations were unexpected, where the results were surprising. Now, that seems to suggest, and to the people who reported these experiments, that there is a certain apprehension of basic mathematical facts. Not necessarily propositionally, obviously not propositional, but a certain perception of certain facts. Whether this is something innate or whatever, I don't know. But it seems also to me relevant to the discussion of intuition in relation to mathematics.
Yeah. Well, let's see. The first. I don't think they're really objections, either one of them, right? I mean, they're sort of comments. Trying to see if I should reply.
You didn't touch upon.
Okay.
You tended to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah. Right. It's. As I suggested earlier. There's a commitment here to there being competences on the part of people, and it might be that people vary in the relevant competencies that they can have, and maybe that basic human competencies are one thing, but the competencies of Ramanujan are quite different and maybe specific to him. That would be compatible with the view here that is so long as there is a competence in Ramanujan that delivers, even if he goes wrong occasionally, maybe he did go wrong occasionally, probably he did go wrong occasionally, still, he may still, on the basic view being promoted here, he would still have justification even for the inhuman bits of knowledge that he acquired when his faculty was at work in delivering those not accessible to humans normally truths. So it's compatible that there be, as for intuitions being propositional or not, including those of the kids and the animals, I guess I want to say they're not propositional in the sense that they're linguistically embedded or linguistically manifestable, perhaps, certainly not by the dogs. But when I speak of them as being propositional attitudes, I don't mean that. I don't mean so I'm willing to allow that there can be thought and perception that is propositional, that is of facts, and you spoke of it being of structures or facts, even when they're not linguistically embedded or manifestable.
Yes, Professor Matthias.
Early in previous work, you have distinguished between animal knowledge and reflective knowledge. I was wondering whether that distinction applies to intuitive knowledge, and if it does, whether intuitive knowledge of the reflective kind requires knowledge of the reliability of one's intuitions, and if that's required, whether using intuitions to establish the reliability of one's intuition is epistemic permissible?
Yeah, well, this connects with one of the two sorts of objections that I mentioned as ones that need to be addressed and met to intuitions. It's the calibration objection that Bob Cummings has emphasized. So, I guess I don't see any way to meet that objection without using intuition to calibrate intuitions. But that would be analogous to using memory to calibrate one's memory. One knows, the areas where one's memory is not so trustworthy, the areas where one's memory is more trustworthy, and one knows that by the use of memory, presumably. So that seems an issue across the board. If one distinguishes reflective knowledge from animal knowledge, then the distinction would naturally apply to this area of the a priori, and And yeah, reflective knowledge would be knowledge that requires not just your foundational exercise of this competence, but your foundational exercise of this competence in a way that is by you rationally defensible. And its rational defensibility, its epistemic rational defensibility, I think would involve a claim of its reliability. And that claim could be defensible to different degrees, with different amounts of richness and elaboration. And the reflective knowledge would be better. Presumably, the better you can defend your attitude that you are manifesting a faculty. So presumably, if we go beyond the manifest image and this survives and is defensible in further inquiry, that would enhance our knowledge. But that's the same, I would think, as all across the epistemic board. Same thing with perception or memory or testimonial.
Okay, well, if it's epistemically permissible to use intuitions to confirm the reliability of intuitions, what would you say to somebody like Richard Fumerton, who has this well-known passage in his recent book where he says you can't use induction to justify induction, you can't use memory to justify memory, and you can't use perception to justify memory, and then he says such circularity is pathetic.
I guess sticks and stones, that would be my answer.
Okay, Grande.
Professor Sosa, a number of people have asked you, have pressed you on the issue of how it is that an intellectual seeming can justify a belief. And I think it'll help me to understand your view on that issue if I understand better why you think that intellectual seeming can itself be justified. So you said at one point that you think intellectual seemings differ from perceptual seemings because perceptual seemings aren't epistemically valuable. They can neither be justified nor unjustified. Whereas intellectual seemings are epistemically valuable. They can be justified or unjustified. Now, I'll agree with you that intellectual seemings are certainly valuable. They can be better or worse in various ways. But of course, so can perceptual seemings be better or worse in various ways. So I take off my glasses and my eyesight is terrible. Well, my eyesight is terrible because it gives me visual experiences that are misleading with regard to the way the world is. So I'm wondering why you think that the evaluability of intellectual seemings, as distinct from that of perceptual seemings, is epistemic. I mean, in an intellectual seeming, if I understand your view, I'm not committing myself to the truth of anything. It just strikes me that something is true. So I'm not endorsing anything, just in the seeming itself. So I'm wondering why you think that the seeming itself is epistemically valuable in the intellectual case.
Right. Well, see, there's a lot of issues here. What's rational? Is rationality something that can apply to the deliverances of the modules? Is it something that's proprietary of the central processing, evaluating system? But let me, I guess, I do want to make those distinctions. But I think there is a kind of normativity that isn't a matter of choice or deliberation or reason of the sort that involves the formation of a belief on the basis of reasons, for reasons. There is a kind of normative epistemic evaluation that's more of the sort that I think you were adverting to in saying things can be better or worse, good or bad, in the formation of these intellectual seemings. And so here I was interested in that broader kind of normativity that includes not only the rational assessment and the rational formation of a belief, where it's the central system that's involved, but the broader thing. And and it's sometimes difficult, I think, to distinguish the two if you allow intellectual seemings to wide range. If you allow a wide range of intellectual seemings so that when you go through an argument, the conclusion seems right, but you're not ready yet to assent to it because you've made mistakes in arguments and reasonings of this sort. So there's a seeming there. Now, you compare the conclusion with other bases, factors that might bear on that question, the conclusion question, the question concerning the proposition that you conclude to. There may be other factors that bear, and now these may incline you for or against. And now you consider the whole set of factors, the testimony, the perception, the apparent conclusion, apparently validly derived. You compare all those seemings, and now you get a resultant seeming. Now, is that resultant seeming as there is a deliverance of reason in the deliberating central processing? Well, in a way, yes. I mean, it's comparing different factors. It's not the formation of a belief yet. So anyway, there are a lot of issues here, and it's very murky exactly how to. But I'm interested in the broadest kind of normativity.
One last brief question, but Professor Peter Klein.
I'll try and be briefer. As I understand it, it's important for you to be able to establish that there are false but justified intellectual seemings. And a way you do that is to draw the distinction between a false and unjustified one. That's the fallacious reasoner case, where if I commit the fallacy of affirming the consequent, it's not the delivery of a module that's generally competent, so it doesn't have any justification to begin with. Whereas in the paradoxes, what you want to say is, well, those things, at least one of the paradoxical statements is false. Of course, all of them could be false. And you want to say about the false ones that they're justified because they are being delivered by a module that typically gets things correct. I guess my question is, why do you think they're being, why do you think that the false one is being delivered by a module that gets it correct most of the time? I mean, the people who commit the fallacy of affirming the consequent will think, nothing wrong with this, I'm just using my reasoning. Now we think, no, they're wrong. Why do you think that in the false paradoxical sentence, it's the delivery of a competent faculty, which just happens to get it wrong, rather than the breakdown? And we just haven't yet discovered why the thing is false. Once we find out, oh no, that's the false one, then we can say, no, it wasn't the module that delivered that. It was it was my hope that it would be true, or it was because of some simplicity factor. Does that question make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, I guess the way I see the picture is intuitively, there are these false, intuitively justified beliefs. And so we would like some account of what's going on with them. We try various things, the traditional perceptual model, the eye of the mind, and so on, the Cartesian introspective model, but they don't work. In fact, the problem arises for them, especially for the Cartesian introspective model. So we cast about for some other way to understand what's going on in this area of epistemic normativity when we positively evaluate these things, absent the normal ways in which things get positive epistemic status, absent reasoning and so on. It's just understanding the proposition that attracts you powerfully. But it's false. It's the false one in the paradoxical cluster. So we cast about for some account of what's happening, and a plausible account, I think, that I find plausible is this competence idea. Now, of course, again, this could turn out to be false. It's an empirical matter now. Is there really a single faculty properly characterizable as a single faculty, single competence that is at work across the board here with simple arithmetic, simple logic, simple geometry, and also propositions such as the one in the paradoxical cluster. And I guess my feeling, my attitude is it's plausible that it is when you consider the case and you compare it with the case of the fallacy, or even compare it with the cases of the mistakes that psychologists find us making all the time. In all of those cases, I think it's very plausible, a lot of them anyway, it's very plausible to say those mistakes are just due to blundering, inattention, carelessness. If you sit the person down and you really rub their nose in the relevant considerations, they're going to see that they were being careless and inattentive and so on. That doesn't seem to work with the paradox. I mean, we rub our noses in the thing and it still looks powerfully attractive, especially before we get the corrective reasoning, right? So, anyway.
So, well, sadly, I think we must finish this session. Thank you very much for all concerned.